Welcome to Midland Women's Soccer and a new series on the channel. We're going to be looking at the various people who work in the world of women's football and their stories of how they got into it and how they're doing, and obviously all the projects they're working on. I'm honoured to have my first guest today, who hails all the way from Scotland. He's perhaps best known for his podcast Leading the Line, which covers the wonderful world of Scottish women's football. Having started the show in 2019, they currently bolster an impressive 87 episodes and have interviewed a plethora of great guests, including Christie Murray and Hayley Lauder. He also has worked for the BBC Scotland popular show A View from the Terrace, as well as writing for Albion Rovers' Matchday programme. A very warm welcome to my guest, Chris Marshall. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Craig. How's it going? I need to make an apology because I think that 87 has come because I don't update the website very often at the moment, because it's 130. I think we're at 113 podcasts.
Well, now. Even better, Chris. Congratulations on the 100. Then I suppose. Sorry about getting that wrong, but obviously such a great milestone as you have done, and hopefully more to come.
Hopefully so. Yeah, the women's season at the time of recording is just a week and a bit away. Up in Scotland at the moment, so yeah, hopefully there'll be more to come in the new season.
Before we delve into your career so far and all that, I want to ask you about your lesser known site, Meat Filled Pastries. I won't admit to being a pie aficionado myself, but you certainly are. So where was the best pie you've had, and why was it so good?
Yeah, Meat Filled Pastries, the thing that I think will be engraved on my tombstone when I die is my love of a good pie. But yeah, so I think probably for me, and it changes because I like to try different ones, but at the moment I think I always say the beef, chicken and haggis pie whenever somebody asks me. So Beath is a town in Ayrshire, and they do a chicken and haggis pie, and it's topped with mashed potato, and it's a rare treat whenever you get one. So yeah, I would say that at the moment that always figures towards the top end whenever I start talking about pies, for sure.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like a good one. I'll probably make you look at me with pure disdain for my favourite pie, but I'll tell you it nonetheless. It's the Genius gluten-free chicken and gravy pie. They come in frozen, but so with some mashed potato, it's really good. But hopefully Chris doesn't leave the show now that I've said that. But
No. If that's a pie you like, that's a pie you like. I'm not here to judge you for that at all. So good stuff.
I appreciate that, Chris. As I'd said, check out Chris's recommendation over mine. But if you have a different favourite, then leave it in the comments below this video. Now, Chris, you studied communications and mass media at Glasgow Caledonian University. While there, you were also the features editor for the Reunion magazine. I also wrote for a student publication back in the day, but I left it until my second year to sign up. Were you interested in writing from the get-go?
I think I said this to you before we agreed to do this, is that I was amazed that you dug that bit of information out, because I'd kind of forgot about it, if I'm being completely honest. Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, my degree at Cal at the time was more kind of film and marketing based, which is kind of where I've kind of gone full circle to at the moment in terms of what I'm doing now. But I've always liked writing. I still write now, and I still try and get the odd piece out now and again when I can get the time to. But yeah, at the time it was a good way to just obviously bolster the CV when you come out of university. And yeah, doing a uni magazine is pretty straightforward. You can kind of write kind of what you want, as long as it's not massively controversial. Although obviously some people have made a living out of being controversial during their student days. But yeah, it was a nice wee thing to do to kind of keep my eye in while I was doing other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your favourite thing you wrote at the time? And did you have any chance to do anything sports related?
Do you know what? I didn't at the time. I think that's because we had the sports editor. And I was thinking about it when you kind of asked me. I was really struggling to actually remember anything that I wrote, which I don't know if that says a lot about actually the quality of what I was writing at the time. But what I would say is that after going to Cali and doing the communication mass media degree, I actually ended up going down to Brighton and doing a degree, kind of postgrad in radio journalism, and that actually was a bit more of a gateway into sport. So there was a lot of kind of doing kind of feature stuff, but I covered a lot of sports. So I spent some time covering football in that part of the world. So I'd kind of cover Brighton, and at that time it was when they were playing at the Withdean. So I think they kind of I had kind of started to lay the foundations for the stadium at Falmer, but I also went to go and see Lewis and Worthing, and obviously Lewis have got a pretty interesting story. And I think at that point that story hadn't quite started yet. But yeah, so I'd spent a bit of time down there, and that's kind of where I kind of started to get my feet back underneath the kind of sports table a little bit.
Yeah, you mentioned that time in Sussex, and during that time, around 2008, podcasts were still in their infancy. But do you remember listening to any around the time, or was that a bit later on when you got involved in podcasts yourself?
I had to have a think about it, and I think I've always kind of been a radio kid. Like, I was thinking about like podcasts, and I was thinking about radio. And I think my earliest memories is in terms of like football. Right, we're going to be talking mainly about football, so let's say football. Like my earliest memories are like listening to the radio as a wee guy. Like I remember listening to Scotland at like Euro '92 in the bath. And we had like this wee tiny black plastic kind of transistor radio. You know, you had a big extendable aerial on it, and you kind of had to get the right spot to hear what you were listening to. And then like I think podcasting, and kind of fast forwarding quite a bit to like the podcasting question, is my first one I kind of remember was through radio, which was the World Football Phone-In that was on BBC Radio 5 Live. So you had Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery, and I think it was interesting for me because it was like a gateway to a world I didn't really know that much about at the time. It was kind of late night radio. It was kind of two voices that weren't very common to hear kind of in the part of the world I live in, talking about football from faraway lands, and they would always get guests on as well, and there's a bit of lightheartedness to it. And I think that was the first kind of notion I had that podcasting was going to become a thing, because I think at that point, you're quite right to say, it was in its infancy, and I think there was still very much that radio getting cut to become a podcast, and had actual podcast standalone, like the massive boom that is now, hadn't quite happened yet. But I think that was kind of like my first kind of instance of maybe listening to like a radio programme at a different time from when I actually went out in air.
Yeah, absolutely. World Football Phone-In, as you say, is a great show, and I think it's still going at the moment. And the fact that it's on like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the UK at least, it's a lot to ask to listen live. But you can always get the same voices and characters coming on to with their calls for Tim and Dotun, as you say, and it's a really good show. And hopefully, I would like to see something like that in the women's game, because there's obviously so much knowledge that we as fans don't know. And if you got experts from different workplaces around the world, if I had the budget to book that sort of show myself, I would try and get that, because I think people would enjoy hearing about South American football, Asian football, all that sort of football that we don't really have a chance to see, either because there's not cameras or because there's just not many people covering it.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that is one of the things with, I'm sure we'll get into it, is that covering women's football, whether it's in Scotland or whether it's in the Midlands or it's anywhere, is you can get by in the area you know best, but as soon as you have to maybe push out into a different area, things become a little bit tricky, and that's when you rely on experts. And luckily, in my experience, certainly when I've been kind of looking for information about maybe Team Scotland are playing or Champions League opponents for kind of Glasgow City, or maybe the teams that are kind of coming up just now, that the experts are quite willing and understand that it is very much a growth industry of a lot of people kind of chipping into the best that they can to kind of get the coverage out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And growing up in Glasgow, I imagine you didn't have much choice about who you supported at the time. Did you have your allegiances decided from an early age?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you can have a choice, but
so some parents would disagree. I think.
I think mine would disagree. Yeah, so I grew up in the blue half of Glasgow, but I mean, going to Rangers games is something that I don't do as much as I would maybe like, or I don't know, maybe like's the right thing to say, because most of my time going to football is actually going to see non-league football. My local side's called Pollock, and it's a team that me, my dad, and my grandpa used to go and see, and like me and my dad still go. But like going to Ibrox is always something a little bit special. It used to be like a Boxing Day treat. It used to be like me, my dad, and my grandpa would go to Ibrox on Boxing Day. It was pretty traditional that the Rangers would always play at home on Boxing Day. And it would be like everybody else would stay around at my grand's and kind of like, I would just sit about and do stuff, and we'd go off to the football and watch the game and then come back and just kind of get seshed as you do at Christmas time. But blue half. So yeah. And I think that's something as well that in Scotland, I'm quite open about who I support. It doesn't change my opinion about things. It's just everybody who follows football is a fan of somebody. So I think that's something that it's fine to admit.
Yeah, football, as you say, is an incredibly popular sport in Scotland, and as many would expect. But the women's game has had its struggles over the years, similar to the ban that impacted women's football in England. Scottish women's football also suffered from the actions of their own football association over the last 50 or 60 years or so. It wasn't really until the Scottish Women's Football Association was founded in the early 70s that things started to get going again. In those early days, you had the teams like Aberdeen, Edinburgh Dynamos, Westbourne United, Motherwell, Dundee Strikers and Stewarton and Thistle. Have any of those teams had any recent success, Chris, or have they fallen away similar to what happened with Doncaster Bells here in England?
I'll try and go through kind of the ones you suggested and as best as I can, because I think one of the things that even as somebody who quote unquote knows about the women's game in Scotland, there's still tons I don't know, because it's a lot of the information from that time period is just so well hidden. But I think in terms of the teams that are about now, I mean, Stuart and Thistle are probably quite well known. They were the team that kind of took a chance on Rose Riley that started off her incredible career. And there is a team in Stuart now called Stuart United, but that Stuart and Thistle team are kind of now the Kilmarnock of today. And there's a little bit of that you kind of see it. It's similar, obviously, to the game down in England, that some teams will transform into other ones. Aberdeen and Motherwell are the two teams that are still playing SWPL football. So Motherwell were in SWPL 1 last season, finished 6th. But I wouldn't say they were necessarily stable at that level. They'd only come up a couple of seasons ago from SWPL 1, and there's still, I think when you compare it to England, there's still so much more flux underneath the kind of very top level of the game in Scotland. And I'm saying top level, I'm saying the top 3 or 4 teams underneath it can go up and down. Aberdeen, for example, were an SWPL team in 2019, got back-to-back relegations, but they've just come back-to-back on the way up, and they have a really young and exciting squad. And I actually think of the teams you've listed, I think they're the teams to kind of keep your eye on this coming season. They've really grown fast, and they have players that are kind of scattered throughout the Scotland youth teams at the moment. But yeah, there's very much a kind of a trend of a lot of the older names from the past are a little bit like older names from the past, and you maybe don't have that dynasty feel about women's football in Scotland yet. Maybe you think Glasgow City is obviously the outlier in lots of things in Scottish women's football, but I don't think you have that quite yet up here.
Yeah, I can understand that. Obviously, Stewarton and Thistle were one of the teams that played in the English FA Cup back in the day, and obviously got to the final and stuff as well. And so it's good to see that other teams are evolving, as you say, over in Scotland. And looking now at the modern game today, Scotland's national team have really come a long way in the last decade or so. What do you think is the reason behind that success?
I think Anna Signeul is often used as a reference point as to how Scotland got to a position where they qualified for, first of all, Euro 2017 and then the World Cup underneath Shelley Kerr. She kind of came in, and there's an excellent book called Arrival by Stephen Losa. And if you're interested about Scottish women's football, I would highly recommend going and giving that a read. And I did a podcast with him as well about it, just to kind of talk about his processes. But I think she very much came in at a time where she could have took a better job. She could have got more money, but the opportunity for the challenge that was making Scotland good. I mean, Scotland were always good, but they were never going to qualify. I remember once speaking to Julie Fleeting for something that I did for Review from the Terrace, which you mentioned earlier on, and she kind of told me a story about how when she was an international player, they would used to go to away games and they would sleep in hostel dorms, and they would have like tins of condensed milk as a kind of like pre-match. As a kind of way to get an energy boost up. And I was just flabbergasted that somebody who had obviously won all these caps, scored all these goals, and this was her story of like being a Scottish national team player. So I think Hannah coming in by herself initially and then being able to bring people in really helped push the game forward in Scotland. I think we've also been blessed with some of the talent we've had over the last decade. I mean, I will go on forever about Kim Little, about how great I think she is as a footballer, but I think throughout that squad over this last kind of decade, we've had a really talented group that have come up together and played at the highest level. So I think we've definitely had a bit of a perfect storm, and I think that's what's made the last 12 months, the pandemic obviously has ruined timelines a little bit, but I think that's what's made the last 12 months so difficult, especially obviously the way the World Cup ended. And then I think the Euro qualifiers, the way it ended, so disappointing. It didn't even get close when it really should have done. We went in as top seeds, but against Finland and Portugal, we didn't score and we lost all 4 games. And yeah, it wasn't really great.
There's a lot of talent in that squad, and as we're seeing with Team GB, there's no surprise that Caroline Weir and Kim Little, when they were both in the team in the first game, they were playing the best football that they have done in the group stages. So hopefully we see them more in the next stage in the quarterfinals tomorrow. Well, it might be today when the video comes out, but but yeah, Friday for those watching this back. Pedro Losa then was appointed the new Scottish manager recently following the departure of Shelley Kerr. What have you made of him so far, and are you hopeful Scotland can push towards qualification for the next World Cup?
I'm pretty excited. I think there was a feeling amongst a lot of people that Scotland needed something a bit fresher. Obviously, the way that the World Cup ended with Shelley, and there was obviously a lot of controversy around that and the events of that, and they're all still shrouded in a little bit of mystery in terms of everything that. But it felt like that carried on into the next squad, and although we started well in 2020 winning the Pinatar Cup, which was I think the first time we'd won that after competing in it for a few times. It seemed to kind of unravel a little bit after we came back from that extended break due to the pandemic, and we lost that game to Finland. I mean, the Finland loss to Easter Road was one of the worst. The way that the game ended, and it kind of killed all the hopes, and then also losing to Portugal twice as well. So when an interim appointment was made, I think the belief was that there'd be somebody coming in pretty soon. I mean, it was done in a weird way. So Shelley Kerr basically stepped down on Christmas Eve. And then we went about 6 months without an appointment. Stuart McLaren came in, did a fine job. Kind of took us over for the last two qualifiers. We lost to Portugal and we defeated Cyprus 10-0. But with all due respect to Cyprus, it's Cyprus, and I think we can't read too much into that. And then we played a couple of friendlies just before kind of the Olympic period in the summer, and I mean we won against it. I mean, we got good results, but it felt like if Stuart was going to stay on, it would have felt like a bit of a backward step. So if I'm being totally honest, when it was announced that Pedro Martinez Losa was coming in, I was a little bit taken aback, but I was pleased. I was very pleased that there's been a lot of change in women's football in Scotland at the moment. There's now been a head of women's and girls soccer, dearie me, head of women's and girls football appointed by the SFA. That itself had been a bit of a drawn-out process. So it's going in the right direction. I think an appointment like this can only help capture the imagination. We've got a pretty kind draw. I mean, Spain are the top seeds in the group, but in the rest of the teams that we can face, I mean, it's teams we can certainly beat, and it gives us that kind of head-to-head notion against Spain. And although Spain are obviously rapidly improving, they still haven't quite got over the line yet as a top-tier team, I don't think. So yeah, I'm excited and I'm interested to see what he brings. He's obviously had success at Arsenal, he's had success at Bordeaux. He knows English game and he knows the Championship as well, which I think is important because it's maybe a bit of a black spot up here because it's not something that gets the coverage that the WSL does. But I think when you look at some of the players that move back and forth from it, it's certainly a level of SWPL where there could be players in there that can certainly help the cause.
Yeah, let's certainly hope so, and it does look like the future is bright for Scotland going forward under the new manager now. That brings us on to the club game. As we are a Midland football outlet, I think it's best to start it with Scott Booth and Glasgow City. The new Birmingham City manager enjoyed great success with the Glasgow side leaving on top with another league title. A lot of teams are starting to invest and catch up with City, but it feels like they were way ahead of their time. Chris, would that be fair to say?
I think they embraced what being a women's football team could be. They are the only standalone team in the top tier. They push the boundaries. They set the goals. I mean, that all comes from Laura Montgomery and Cass, Caroline Stewart, who both kind of head up the club. And I think that all comes from them. And that meant that they could dominate because they made Glasgow City the destination to be a women's footballer in Scotland, no matter which team you played for. If you went to Glasgow City, you knew that you would probably win things, and it could be a gateway to bigger opportunities, and that's bore out obviously over time with some of the players that we've added to the WSL or over to Europe as well. So yeah, I mean, Scott Booth, when he came in, he continued that. He won 6. I'm going to say 6. I didn't write it down, but I'm pretty sure it's 6 titles he won during his time at Glasgow City. I think as well we got the Scottish Cup monkey off his back. Hibs went through a spell of winning all the cups, and Glasgow City winning the league all the time. And the 2019 final, which was a pretty spectacular occasion actually, it got a record domestic crowd, and it was a cracking game. And Glasgow City winning that Scottish Cup, and then him obviously leading them to the quarterfinals for the second time. Obviously, the defeat to Wolfsburg wasn't the result anybody would have wanted, but would have been realistic to expect it was going to be that difficult. So I think for Scott, my instinct is it probably was the right time for him because how much more he could achieve. He'd seen off the challenge of Rangers and Celtic this season, who had both put some money into their teams, and I think a lot of people thought that they would get by Glasgow City quite comfortably, and I have to say, halfway through the season, it looked like that might have been the case, but they recruited incredibly well when you look back on it now over that winter period, and really showed why they have won that league so consistently over that period of time, that they are the champions that are still the team to beat, as it was proven by the end of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you see his departure as a bit of a turning point for women's football in Scotland? Obviously, there's teams like Celtic and Rangers who are putting a bit more money into the team, getting better quality players. And will Glasgow City struggle to dominate, or will we see some new champions in years to come, do you think?
I think we will see new champions in the years to come. I don't think Glasgow City will remain in that mix, certainly for a while yet. You referenced Doncaster Bells earlier on, and I think that's a question everybody has about any kind of standalone women's football team, is that how long that can sustain if a big side with a big men's conglomerate behind them can really push them out. But I think what you're seeing this season is Glasgow City obviously had to step up. They've been bringing players in. Rangers and Celtic have been offering full-time contracts. Hibs and Spartans, two teams that are traditionally very much at the top end of the women's game in Scotland, have now started offering semi-pro contracts as well. So the game is developing, and it's developing at a good rate just now. So I'm really excited to see how it goes, because competition makes entertainment, and I've always believed that. It can be Brazil against Argentina in a World Cup final, or a Copa America final to keep it recent, or it can be two West Midlands non-league sides going head to head. And if it's competitive, it's going to be far more marketable and sellable. And I think that's a big thing that Scottish football, especially Scottish women's football, needs to do, is market itself and make it something that people want to watch and tune into, and have stakes and have the jeopardy that you get from competition.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that in England, obviously, as the WSL becomes a more competitive league, players are dropping down into the Championship, and by that token, its Championship is becoming a much stronger league, and it's arguably more competitive and more enjoyable to watch at the moment than the WSL. But that's up for debate, of course. Before we get on to Booth in more detail, Glasgow had a lot of quality players over the years. Indeed, they still do. But let's start with Abbi Grant. She spent a few years with Birmingham and recently joined newly promoted Leicester City. What do you remember of her during her time in Scotland? And I know before her injury, she was really starting to find her form for Scotland on the international stage. You mentioned the Pinatar Cup, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I remember tons about the early parts of Abby's career, and it's something that you need to kind of reflect on, and it's been a wee while now. But in terms of that second spell at City, when she kind of came back, and it was basically the spell that led to her moving to Anderlecht and then winning the Belgian Championship there. I really like Abbi Grant. I think she's got a bit of dynamism about her in terms of the way she plays. She can obviously score a goal, which is always an important commodity in any form of football, no matter what it is. I know there was obviously some injury issues last season as well, and I was a little bit disappointed she didn't get a real run at it with Birmingham City. But I'm also kind of excited for her to sign in for Leicester. Leicester look like they are moving upwards, and I know they are moving upwards because they've just been promoted, but and just in the general feel, the kind of noise you get out of Leicester City when you're kind of watching what they do and how they interact on social media and things like that, I think Leicester City are a pretty exciting team for her to get involved in. And you mentioned, obviously, she got her first Scotland goal in the Pinatar Cup against Iceland. It was a really well-taken goal, part of a 1-0 victory. And yeah, I'm really excited to see her, first of all, back at full fitness, and then hopefully getting regular games at Leicester. And if she starts scoring goals again, it gives us another option up front, where we seem to have, I think, a lot of options up front for Scotland, but all of them could on their day potentially start. Just now, there's nobody really struck out yet in terms of being the number one.
Yeah, absolutely. She came across as a really, really nice person, Abby. When during her time at Blues, I had her even on my podcast a few times, and I vividly remember her celebrating the win over Aston Villa on her crutches on the pitch at Villa Park. So she's got that passion to when you get a big win over a rival, and she might do that the same when Leicester play Blues next season. But we'll come to that bridge when we get to it. But as you mentioned, a good run at Leicester could see her back in contention for Scotland. Chris, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with Pedro coming in as well, it means that there's different eyes to look at players, and won't necessarily always be the same players that are going to get selected. So yeah, I think any Scottish player, and I think a lot of Scottish players have kind of moved about at the moment. A couple still haven't landed anywhere. And in WSL, I think think it's a really good opportunity to kind of strike out, and there'll be a little bit of starting new as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And she joins fellow Scot Sophie Howard at Leicester, who joined the Foxes herself just last year from WSL side Reading. It's a while ago now, Chris, but did you think it was a bit of a surprise when the move happened that she dropped down a division last summer?
I was a bit, yeah. Because Sophie had played pretty regularly for Reading, and I think she played pretty well when she had played for them as well. But I think when, as you say, we have the benefit of hindsight now with that move, and I think actually when you look at it, it's worked out really well for her. She kind of became a stick-on first choice. She became a bit of a leader of that team, and I spent the season winning at a good level. As you've mentioned, the championships almost more competitive and almost a more entertaining watch. It's funny you said that, because it's sometimes something that's said about SWPL2 and SWPL1, so there's a similar dynamic potentially in that regard. But she's obviously then gone on to have a really successful season, win a title, and she's then back in the WSL. And I think the centre back spots for Scotland there's the need for a bit of replenishment. I mean, Rachel Corsie and Jen Beattie have been the stalwarts for a long period of time, and they've still certainly got a couple of seasons in them, but maybe only one more international campaign potentially, depending on how they're feeling about their bodies and what they want to do with the next stages of their career. So players like Sophie are certainly ones that are going to be looking to kind of push on, and maybe in the next kind of 3-4 years, maybe make one of those centre back spots their own.
Chloe Arthur, she left Birmingham to join rivals Aston Villa. Arthur was always a tidy player in midfield when I saw her for Blues, but was often played out in defence for Scotland. Chris, where do you think her best position is?
I'd like to see Chloe in midfield. I think there is a gaping hole in the Scotland national team at the moment. Gaping hole's maybe a bit extreme, but there's definitely a hole in the Scotland national team that has been vacated by Leanne Crichton retiring. Extremely experienced player, and you know, she was a very good ball player, but she also did the dirty stuff. She got the tackles in. Leanne's one of the players that you'd always know, she might get a booking. She probably will get a booking, but you need that in the midfield. And I think in the Scotland midfield just now, we have a lot of very talented ball playing midfielders, but perhaps we lack a little bit of bite. And I think when I look at the players that could potentially fill in that role, Chloe, who obviously has her own injury issues over recent times as well, I think she should be looking to step up into that defensive midfield role. I've never really backed the push to put Chloe further back in midfield. I think she's good enough to play in midfield, and she can use those defensive instincts in that part of the pitch. And yeah, I'd really like to see her hopefully settle in that position kind of going forward.
Yeah, I thought she had a good season at Blues, and then when she went to Villa, I did think she struggled a bit last season, but obviously Villa struggled as well, so it's hard to see if that was her or just the way they were playing. But do you expect her to take a game to another level now that she's got Carla Ward in, someone who has a track record in recent years at least of bringing out the best of players and bringing their confidence back?
I mean, I've been watching from afar, which is all I can do at the moment. I've been impressed by Carla Ward. Obviously, she did a really good job at Sheffield United, and I think keeping Birmingham, I'm keen to get your opinion on this, to be honest with you, Craig, because I think obviously keeping Birmingham up the way she did was a phenomenal achievement. But from all the signs that I've seen, it certainly looks like Carla could be the type of coach that can get the most out of a player if they put the effort in. And I'm sure Chloe would do that. I mean, I'm curious, what's your thought in that respect?
The manager we had before was Marta Tejedor, Spanish coach, who didn't really click with the players, and the confidence of particularly Becca Holloway, who's in Northern Ireland international now, who will be at the Euros next year even. Her confidence was the lowest it probably could have been when Carla came in, and she got her confidence back, and she brought out the best in her, the best we've seen at Blues. So I think under Carla, Chloe will do well, and hopefully I think Villa will be mid-table, maybe mid-table into the top half next season. That's how much of an improvement I think she can make as a manager, because she brings out the confidence in players, and I think they can do well under her this season. We will finish up by taking a look at Birmingham City's Scottish duo Christie Murray and Sarah Ewens. Murray seems to be a player who will run until her feet fall off, but I often feel she's utilised a bit too deep for Blues last season. Do you think she needs to be higher up the field, Chris, to get the best out of her?
I think so, yeah. She was actually one of the players tried in that kind of deeper role for Scotland, and she did okay. She's got that, as you mentioned, she will run and run. She's got that tenacity about her. But I think she is better deployed further up the pitch. I've interviewed Christie before, and I think lovely person. I really enjoy speaking to Christie, and I think she has got that ability further up the pitch. I know she's obviously got the captain's armband at Birmingham as well, which is a responsibility I think she really thrives on and takes hold of. But yeah, I would like to see her further forward. I mean, I feel like I've said injuries a lot just now, but there has been I think it's maybe part of why Scotland have had this kind of weird kind of meander phase at the moment, because there has been so many injuries. But I remember when she got that goal against Albania after coming back from injury, and everybody was delighted for her. So yeah, I would like to see Christie further up the park, because she has got that ability to unpick sides, and she can score the odd screamer as well, which is always lovely to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she has the passing ability to play as a deep playmaker, but I think she's better when she can do the final killer ball in the final third, and I think Blues were missing that a bit last season, where she had to do all the work so far deep. By the time she gets forward, then you're not really got the support to get the goals, and we struggled for goals last season, at Blues at least. And she was given the armband, as you say, by Carla Ward last season, and helped to inspire survival under difficult circumstances. She played briefly under Scott Booth at Glasgow, Chris. Do you think he will get the best out of her again?
I mean, I think it's kind of hard to tell. I think they've both obviously kind of gone on different journeys over the last few years, but I think the one thing that Scott did, I think particularly in his last season at Glasgow City, one thing that Scott did prove that he can get the best out of players. I'm going to cite an example. It might be a bit niche for some folk, but it might be really interesting for others. So I'm going to cite it, and people can decide either way. But they signed a Scotland under-19 international, Lauren Davidson, from Hibs, and she kind of turned into a kind of bit of a fringe player at Hibs, wasn't getting much game time. She moved to Glasgow City, and I think a lot of people were a bit surprised. They didn't kind of see her fitting in and being a player that would be part of a title push, but under Scott Booth, she has flourished. She looks a player renewed. She scored a couple of cracking goals. She's got a bunch of assists towards the end of the season, and she's turned into a real first-team player for Glasgow City. And I think that's one of the things that, if you're a Birmingham City fan, you can take encouragement from that kind of thing, because I think there's always a question about, when you have the best players, how easy it's to see as top. But seeing players like Lauren Davison and Jenna Clark, who's a young centre-back, who's also a Scotland Youth International, both of them developed a ton over the last season. I think Scott Booth and the team they had around them definitely got to take some credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we get onto Sarah, Chris, what sort of manager is Scott Booth? What sort of way does he like to play as a coach?
Pretty attacking. Yeah. He likes to go for it. You'll enjoy him on the touchline. I'll tell you that much. He is not short in a shout. He's probably the coach I've seen get booked most. He's always got a good opinion. I mean, I think the thing with Scott is you always get something from him in my experience, is you always get something from when you speak to him. And I think one of the things that, I mean, the thing about him as well is that he had a spell in the lower leagues of Scotland that didn't really go that well, to be perfectly honest with you. And he kind of ended up at Glasgow City, and he seems to just understand the women's game and understand the potential of it, and understand for growth in it. So I think that in itself is a plus point. And I also think the fact that he definitely doesn't there's no kid gloves. And I think it's something that gets talked about a lot in women's football, whether it be the narratives or the way that it's covered in the media, is that sometimes people feel they need to be a bit cautious about how they approach things. You don't get that with Scott. Scott will say what he sees, and he'll call it as it is. So yeah, I think it's a big challenge he's got, obviously, at Birmingham City, and it's a completely different one from the one he's had at Glasgow City for the last few years. But yeah, I would expect the plan would be to be attacking, but he can be pragmatic if it needs to be. And I expect to see some ball players coming into that team, if there isn't a couple already, to build around the likes of Christie Murray. As
you say, quite attacking, so it'll be expected to get a few goals from their latest signing, Celtic striker Sarah Ewens, who joins the Blues after 4 years with the Hoops. Ewens was the second top scorer in the Scottish Premier League last season. From your experience, what kind of striker is she, and do you think she'll fit into the way Booth wants to play?
Sarah Ewens is really interesting. I think she at the start of the season, she wasn't in the first team a lot. She was kind of on the bench and coming on making sub appearances under Fran Alonso. And I was a bit perplexed, because I always find Sarah Ewens one of the most dangerous players in the league. She has got a bit of presence about her. She's quick, as you mentioned at the start. I've done a number of interviews with kind of players over the time, and sometimes I'll ask them like who's our kind of most fierce opposition. And anytime I speak to a fullback, Sarah Ewens is always top of that pile, because of the way that she can just run with the ball. She's sometimes a little bit streaky, so she can go on really good runs, and then she can be quiet for a couple of games. But she's had the benefit now of full-time training. She was one of the Celtic players to get offered a full-time deal when they kind of announced that they were going to go pro. So that's only seen her ability progress. And I think the fact that she's now going to go to Birmingham City, which has been an established full-time environment, the facilities at Birmingham City, I know there was a lot of chat around them last season. But I think that if everything has settled down as is, I think it's the facilities that she'll have at Birmingham will only help her get better. And I think with Scott knowing her and knowing the type of player she is, I think that'll only help her as well. I think it's a really exciting. I mean, I think any player coming from SWPL to the WSL has an element of a bit of a punt to it. You're not everybody's going to turn into Erin Cuthbert, for example, but I think she definitely has all the right tools to make a success at a higher league. And I'm really excited to see how she gets on, because I think on her day she was one of the most dangerous players in the league, absolutely.
That's good to hear, and hopefully we see more of her this season. Blues, obviously, they're beginning to play at St Andrews this season, which is a very good stadium, probably one of the best in the league for a women's team to play at in that case anyway. And now we've taken up a lot of your time already, Chris, but I'd like to finish with some quick fire questions if you don't mind. We talked just briefly mentioning St Andrews there, but what is your favourite stadium that you've been to?
I mean, I would always answer first of all by saying any new one I go to is always a bit of a thrill. No matter the size of it, a new stadium is always exciting. But the Vicente Calderon, which is no longer standing, unfortunately, the old home of Atletico Madrid, it was just beautiful. It had the big kind of South American style scoreboard at it, the big curve when the sun set down it. You kind of couldn't see for a while, and then it was beautiful. You had a lovely walk down from the centre of Madrid, down the patio, hopping in at tapas bars. Yeah, I mean, that was an absolute dream. It's a shame it's not there any longer. I mean, the Wanda's nice, but it's never going nowhere. And that's in itself is a bit of a shame.
Very good choice. Your favourite player growing up?
I was always a bit of a goalie guy. So I think I probably have to say Andy Gorham, who was Rangers keeper during the kind of 9 in a row era, known as the goalie. I was a kid that had an Andy Gorham shirt when I was younger, so I was one of the weird kids that had the goalie shirt. But yeah, I always loved a bit of a goalie, and I always like a kind of bit of a cult left back. So Sasa Papac, when I was a bit older, played for Rangers, Bosnian left back, bit of a cult hero of mine as well.
Your favourite moment in football? I
would have to say being at a World Cup to see Scotland. I was in France for Scotland being at the World Cup, and I am old enough to remember France '98, but I wasn't old enough to go to it. So I think seeing Scotland at a World Cup was cool, and then getting to see Scotland play at the Euros this summer. I actually live not very far away from Hampden, so I can walk over. So I managed to get a ticket for one of the games, and when we scored, that was such a high. I mean, what happened after it, not so much, but at the time, what a high that was.
What do you think the next big thing is going to be? Who do you think is it under the radar perhaps now that might be in 5 or 10 years will be a player we'll be really looking at?
I'll give you like a popular choice, and I'll give you a bit of an under radar one. And I've actually got a question for you on it as well. So I think for me, Sam Kerr, who was at Glasgow City, is now at Rangers. She was involved with Glasgow City, didn't always start at Rangers. She's kind of been signed as kind of one of their main players. And during the kind of back end of the season, Rangers kind of struggled, and she was like the star and light. She's already been capped by Scotland. She's 21 now, and she's a driving forward midfielder. She's maybe not necessarily somebody would put down as like a technician, or like you would like a Kim Little or a Caroline Weir, but she's just a driver and runner, and she can push play forward. And I think that's a really good quality to have as well in football. I mean, it's easy to forget like Kirsty Hansen and Erin Cuthbert are still pretty young, especially Erin, who seems like she's already been around for about a decade. And then I think maybe as a bit of an under-radar one, Leah Eddy, who made her Scotland debut in the last friendlies there. She's only 20, she's a centre-back, but I managed to see Leah kind of close quarters quite a lot over the last season, and I've been really impressed with her. She's very composed in the ball. She's not afraid to tackle, and she's got enough of that physicalness that actually maybe in a couple of years' time she could become a really dominant force in that centre-back area for sure. But I mean, one of the ones that if we were doing this a year ago, for example, Craig, I would definitely have said Jamie Lee Napier. She obviously kind of got the move to Chelsea on the back of a really great season for Hibs, where she just played everywhere because that was how good she was. And also she's gone out to loan in Birmingham City. I thought she had a pretty good season at Birmingham City, Craig. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And then obviously she's kind of now signed for London City Lionesses, who have got Eddie Gallagher, who used to be at Celtic as their kind of director of football. So I'm really keen to see Jamie Lee get a good season, and hopefully she's kind of nailed in a position. I think that's the big thing for Jamie Lee now, because I think there's still a belief that she can be the next big attacking threat. But I think there's still a bit of a debate about where her best position in the park is.
Yeah, I would say last season she had to do so much work tracking back, which is why I think Carla Ward really likes her, because she would run herself into the ground for the team. and she didn't perhaps get to attack as much as she would have liked, but I really saw something in her, and I was really surprised that she went down to the Championship. But as we said, a lot of players are doing that now, so hopefully when she gets more game time in that league, she might be able to get another move up to the WSL, or even London City Lionesses get promoted. But it's gonna be interesting to see how she gets on, as you say, under someone she's worked with previously. The last question for you, Chris, before we let you go, is the all-important question: your favourite kit of all time?
Sampdoria 90s kit with the ERG on it, collar, the blue, the white and red and black. It's just chef's kiss of a kit. Absolutely. So when I always go to whenever somebody asks me that question, it's just brilliant. That
was great, Chris. Before you go, let's just tell everyone what you're currently working on and where people can find you.
Yeah, so I suppose I currently work in TV production. So we've just finished the run of The View from the Euros, which is a Euros special based on Scotland being at the tournament, and we are hoping to extend into another series of Review from the Terrace. Outside of that, you'll maybe catch me writing in some of the football publications that do the rounds. I'm keen to try and get more of an eye on women's football, doing it like that. But sometimes a little bit hard to get those stories out. But yeah, other than that, Leading the Line will be back very soon. We're having a bit of a summer break just now. And yeah, women's football starts back in Scotland on the 8th of August with the SWPL Cup, and then the league starts, I think, 2 weeks later. So yeah, exciting times ahead, and there's Champions League coming as well. So yeah, lots coming, which is really exciting.
Absolutely, and once again, I'd like to big thank you to you, Chris, for coming on, and I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
No, thanks so much for having me on, Craig. It has been an absolute blast.